Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the patient story. I hope you're all doing very well. I've been looking forward to this interview for a little while, and I'm so glad that we could catch this woman who's an absolute superstar in what she does. Terri Conneran with KRAS Kickers. Thank you for joining us today to share your story.
Well, thank you for having me, Stephanie. It's important to be able to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And our audience is patients, caregivers mostly, and so I know they'll be very interested to hear what you went through, and of course, the work that you continue to do for people in lung cancer and specifically KRAS. So before we start, though, I always like to ask. I've started to anyway. To tell us a little bit about yourself outside of cancer and in this world.
Well, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and transplanted here from Arizona and from the Chicago suburbs. I have three kids that are all full-on adults, an amazing husband, and we kind of play some games. We do football. We like to just kind of hang out and enjoy life.
So does that mean you're watching the Super Bowl this weekend?
We're watching the Super Bowl this weekend, but like anything else, COVID is just kind of given us a new way of looking at everything.
That's true. Yes, very true. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been a year just about. But anyway, Terri, I'd love to get started. For our audience, we're going to have three videos. This first one is dedicated to Terri, figuring out that she had cancer and the treatment decisions. Our second clip will be about the treatment that Terri underwent. And the last one will be about quality of life, navigating cancer, and we'll dip into Terri's advocacy work, which is really, really important here because there are a lot of exciting developments going on for KRAS, and we're excited to get into that. So for this first segment, Terri, why don't you just let us know? I know it starts in summer of 2016, about where you're starting to feel these first symptoms of labored breathing, and you go through a series of misdiagnoses. Can you walk us through what was going on and how you finally figured out what was happening?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The thing is that when you look back historically, it makes a little bit more sense, right? But when you're going through it, you just think, oh, it's allergies. I've got a cold. Oh, I've had asthma intermittently through my life. So I went back and forth to the doctor several times, and she's like, you try doing, the over-the-counter stuff and, all that sort of thing. And we changed up my asthma medication, and still I was really struggling. We spent quite a bit of time at the beach, and it just reached the point where the humidity it just was oppressive. And so went back again to the doctor, and like every other busy mom, right? You just kind of push things off and push it off till finally I went back to the doctor a couple of days before Christmas in 2016. And by then it had turned into full blown pneumonia. She could hear the fluid in my lungs and treated me with antibiotics. But we did an X-ray at that point, and fortunately, from that X-ray, which is not a really good diagnostic for lung cancer, the fluid showed up and highlighted the tumor that was in my lungs. So from that, I went back after the first of the year, and just a couple of weeks later, and we followed up with a considerable amount of testing.
Well, right. So that was the start of an extensive amount of testing. Before we get there, did you, when they said, oh, there's fluid in lungs, I mean, how did you react? When did you realize, oh, there's something quite serious going on? I'm not just dealing with pneumonia.
When she got there and she said you could feel I could feel the fluid. It made more sense that I have walking pneumonia or bronchitis. And when I went back there and saw what she was talking about, you could very clearly see there was something inside my lung. And at that point, because cancer runs in my family, I was kind of really strongly convinced it was probably cancer,
Mm.
but I was like afraid to kind of like say those words. And my doctor was like, well, we're just going to come back. We're just going to come back right after the first of the year. Promise me you'll come right back in like 10 days. And so that's when we went back. And when I wasn't feeling better by the first, I knew for sure something was completely wonky
Okay.
and we needed to do something. So that's when we kind of went back and saw the pulmonologist and went through a long diagnostic period. It wasn't as extensive as some people's, but it did take a solid 3 weeks.
So you talk about all these tests. Can you walk us through the different tests that you underwent? I saw PET scan, CT scan. There was a biopsy at some point. And if you could also describe just generally for people who haven't undergone these procedures, what it was like you went through this machine, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's a really valid point because I have no idea the difference between an X-ray or CT or a PET scan or any of that, right? You don't find out until you need to know, right? And so it's really important to kind of understand that. Initially, I went back and had a CT scan, and it was just very simple. You just laid on the table, and the machine did all the work, and there was like no prep. They did it, and they could still see that there was something going on. And so we could prove to the insurance and all the other powers that be that we needed to extend it past that. I had to do another CT scan where they put some dye, injected some dye into me. And it's like a couple hours of fasting, but it's simple stuff. Just laying there, the machine does all the work, nothing hard, nothing painful, very quick, very painless, except for the stress around waiting. And the PET scan is a little bit more extensive. That's where they do like a whole body scan, basically from the neck down. And you have to do a certain amount of fasting and not eat sugar and eat all high protein items. Because they inject some sort of like a special sugar inside of your body to be able to find any sort of metabolic uh, activity, which would be something that would be indicative of cancer. That the tests themselves aren't hard. The waiting around and having the test is very stressful. And so I went through the CT scans, right? So I did the CT scan and then did the next CT scan and saw the pulmonologist, and they send you back out for another test. And after all going through all that, the doctor did determine I really needed to get a biopsy to know. And that whole period of time takes like 3 weeks.
Right. Actually, before we dive into the biopsy, you mentioned it a couple times. The scans are, they're painless, they're pretty easy. The contrast dye can feel weird, as if you might remember, you feeling the urge to go to the bathroom. You're not. It's kind of strange. But it's the waiting. It's the waiting for you go through this and then you're like, okay, leave now. I don't have any results. How did you manage through what people call scanxiety?
Well, the anxiety doesn't like really hit until like later, like now I'm doing follow-ups and I'm 4 years down the road. But then it's just a matter of you're not even sure what you're waiting for. Okay. When you're first diagnosed, and I think that was really a very stressful time for me, as it is for most people. You don't know what's coming, you don't know what's next. You're not really sure what you're waiting for. Am I waiting to hear there is something there, there's something not there? What am I waiting to hear? What am I even hoping for? Right? It's not like you know the rules to this game. And so there is, okay, you don't realize, and I didn't realize that when you have it done and then you wait a couple of days and then you have to get something else done, they still don't know. You can't just stop. And it is stressful and it is hard. And how do you manage it? It's like anything else. You just got to do what you got to do, right?
Right.
You want to have the right results and you want to have the right information. So the important thing is getting it done so you can see clearly what is there.
Right, right, the full picture. Okay, so you're at this point, you've done these scans. How about the biopsy? At what point does that happen? And can you describe that procedure?
Based on where the cancer is in your body, right? Okay. And mine is lung cancer. And so that's the part that they had to go into. And not all lung cancers have it is easily accessible as mine was. So relatively speaking, it wasn't as bad. And so a lot of times like you get it all, whacked out in your head. It's like I think of my lungs as like balloons. And I was kind of really concerned that they were going to pop. Okay, to be honest with you, and they don't, because there's fluid and there's other things around it. And so there was a little bit of prep, and I couldn't take certain things for several days, but went into the hospital And it was just a several hour procedure. They kind of stuck the needle in where they needed to go. And I got like a little whacked out on the cocktail stuff they gave you. And that was kind of it. And my doctor was able to call me back within 48 hours of the test
Wow.
to let me know the results of it.
Wow, that's pretty quick. So the biopsy, just to be clear, were you slightly under basically, or were you completely?
It was, well, I'm kind of a real lightweight when it comes to those things. So I think they were going for cocktail and I just kind of,
Passed out.
mm,
Well, that's great because then you woke up and it was all done.
it was all
Okay.
done and it wasn't horrible. It wasn't horribly painful. It wasn't like, I was like burned from one end to the other or whatever. It was just a little bit tender, a little bit sore. And so it was relatively easy.
Good.
It was actually I think it was the next day is my doctor got the results back very quickly, and he offered to either give them to me on the phone or to have me come in for an office appointment. I'm not much for waiting. I'd already felt like I waited quite a bit, so I
Mm,
was like, just give it to me, right? I want to know.
yeah.
And he told me that it was a non-small cell adenocarcinoma, and that's what I knew on a Friday. And the next, you're just, even if you suspect, even if you know, even if you believe, hearing somebody actually spell it out for you is so a moment that you just stop. It's kind of that out of body moment, like being in a car accident or something. And you can remember that moment, that feeling, like I can still like think of like having a pen, and it's like I don't know what I was expecting to hear. I wasn't surprised, but he was talking to me and it wasn't some sort of weird dream.
So out of body in a sense, even though, as you said, you had already suspected cancer, you were familiar with it from your family, but having it be told to you is obviously a completely different experience, and one that is vivid for you still, right? Um,
Absolutely. And there's like you can just like remember where you're sitting, and kind of like how you feel, and whatever. And at one point I turned to my husband, this like even just a year ago, I said, well, you weren't there. He's like, yeah, I was there, because I was so in my own head
right.
that it was like I can't, all I can remember is just this one place, this one moment, this right
Mhm.
one thing right there. And so it was kind of intense, not gonna lie, it was intense. And now you hear it, now now what?
Right. Now what? That's exactly the question I think almost all of us, think, right? Now what? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? All these things. And I want to talk about how you managed it. Also your guidance maybe to other people when it comes to this. But one question we get sometimes is like, how do you process? Did you process the diagnosis in that moment? I mean, how can you, I guess,
Oh,
right?
I'd love to tell you I'm some sort of overachiever, but no, you're it's really the closest. I have never been hit by a train, but that's kind of what I imagine it feels like, is that I'm looking this way and the train hits me out of here.
Right.
And now what? And it really definitely, you're confused, and it's just, I mean, now it's a legitimate diagnosis. It's not all in my head. It's not just a cold. It's not, whatever I did or didn't do. I can't fix this with kale or exercise.
Um,
I I have a diagnosis, and now what?
right.
And so I mean, so much so that the next morning when I woke up, and like any, I guess, going into shock, you're not really sure what is and what's not, right? And so it's kind of like you try and steady yourself. And I go downstairs first thing in the morning, and I mean, it just felt heavy and I can't breathe. And it's like, I'm thinking, I must be having a heart attack. It must just be the stress of the whole event. And I couldn't get that anxiety to kind of leave. In fact, it was more than anxiety. My husband, bless his heart, he he's like, you have to go to the doctor. It's like, I'm kind of stubborn. It's like, no, I'm gonna go to the doctor. I'm fine. This can wait. He's like, no, you really need. And so anyway, so we negotiated back and forth, and I ended up back at the emergency room, and I was not doing really well. My lungs had filled up uh, um, from fluid, and I was essentially drowning. And that's why my chest was heavy and hurting. And but in my mind, I'm still, like I said, it's still kind of a moment of shock. And so I'm convinced that it must be stress. It must just be the anxiety of it all. And so, so that's when, so being in the hospital, and then they had to kind of like take some of the fluid off my lungs, which is not an unusual situation with some sort of a pneumonia, and isn't a horribly painful procedure, but it is life-saving. And so we went through that over the course of the weekend. And because now I was a brand new diagnosed lung cancer patient, and those words still, they couldn't kind of come out right. Right now, it just comes skating off like I'm a mom of three. It just didn't come flowing out of my mouth at that point. And went through and met my team at that point, my oncologist.
So it started right then. The next day you had the lungs filled with fluid, they took care of it, and then boom, the oncologists, you met the whole team. Okay. What was that like? And by the way, how did you know where to go? Was it like, oh, it's just the closest hospital to me, or?
Well, because of the way it happened with my lungs filling up and doing well and whatever, I just kind of went to the hospital that my pulmonologist was at and that my normal PCP was at. And it's not a major research cancer. I mean, they treat cancer patients. It's kind of what they consider like a hybrid. It's part of a bigger system. And so I just kind of went there because that's where I always go for my healthcare, needs. So it wasn't some big research. I wasn't breathing. I went to the hospital, and that's where I was. And that's where I met the team and met the oncologist and what have you. While I was there, they were just in the process of setting up tumor boards for that upcoming week. And I was like the last slot to slide into the lung cancer tumor board, which they do only every other week. So I was very fortunate from that standpoint. And by going in and like I said, it wasn't like I chose it. It wasn't like some big research process.
Right.
It was a matter of, this is where I just always go.
Right. And you had to. I mean, there was an immediate need, obviously, with the lung situation. What do you remember from meeting the medical team? And I know they had tumor boards, so it probably took a little bit of time to come up with the actual treatment plan. I'm assuming, or was she able to give you a general sort of sense of this is what you're in for?
Yeah, we had a really quick general idea of what was going on. I did tumor. And I still would like to kind of know the mystery that goes on behind a tumor board, right? Like, especially what did mine look like, right? Where all the doctors from all the different disciplines, the radiologist and oncologists and all the different portions of it, and they kind of go through your case and look at all your factors, your age, your health, how things are, where things look like what they are, and what are the next steps. It's not just a one and done event. So they went through and did that. And then we were able to get in. And the way my clinic does it is they bring you in as a separate appointment to the hospital setting, and all the doctors from the different disciplines come to you. So you have one appointment and they come to you. And on that same day, my family was able to meet the radiologist, the oncologist, and the nutritionist. I can't even remember, a host of all of them, whether I saw them or not, or needed to see them. And I was able to meet a nurse navigator to kind of help me answer questions.
I love that you're bringing up the nurse navigator. I know not all the different hospitals or medical centers have these, but there usually is a point person at least who can help coordinate care, answer some questions. Medical team is going to answer medical questions, but when it comes to the logistics and all those other things, you deal with other people. Do you have any guidance for people watching on um, whom they should be seeking out? Because it's not just about the diagnosis, but it's like navigating life, right? And the questions to ask at that point in
Oh,
hindsight.
for sure. Because when you're in to see the doctor, you want to ask the important doctor questions, right? You don't want to feel like you're wasting their time or your time and be able to get, more specific information. And in our setting, it's called a nurse navigator. Sometimes it's under the social work. Sometimes it's under some sort of a supportive care network. It might be like some sort of community care. They have different names, but kind of all has the same sort of meaning. And the nurse navigator was able to point us into service areas, whether it was like a support group that we needed, financial assistance if we're looking for next testing, understanding. She really had just a wealth of information. It was kind of like if I needed a mom to go to, okay. And maybe it's because my nurse navigator, Phyllis, was so amazing that I was just really fortunate. But I kind of looked like at her like, like the mom or the older sister that I could kind of lean into. And maybe she personally hadn't been through it, but she could point me in the right direction. And so that was really helpful. And she really she really does an amazing job. She's really does an amazing job because she could help you if somebody says, well, you need to come back in 3 months, but your doctor says you need to come back in 3 weeks. Okay, now there's a disconnect. She can kind of help you figure out how to get that straight, right? And kind of work behind the scenes in the administrative red tape that needs to be resolved.
Right, right. And there's so much thrown at you as a patient. Any other tips? I know I've heard some people talk about it's so overwhelming, especially in the beginning, that you're going to hear some stuff and you're going to miss a lot. So have other people with you at appointments, or even record if your medical team's okay with it. Do you have anything to add in that regard?
Questions. And if you don't understand, have them explain it to you. Yes, write it down, bring other people with you. I mean, we had 4 people smashed in like a little room, okay? And each one of my kids was asking totally different questions, things that I never would have thought to ask. And at the same time, it wasn't just that they got the information, but I had them to ask later
Right.
because I wasn't necessarily hearing everything I needed to hear at that moment because there's just a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, and you're trying to take it all in. And be honest with you, you just don't feel that good. I mean, physically, you're not on top of your game. It's not like you went into this, and you're all revved up, ready to go.
Right.
You're not feeling it good.
Absolutely.
And so it really makes a difference to take the notes and ask the questions. And the more I look back at it, I wish I felt less threatened to ask the questions
Yeah.
because the doctors, the team wants to explain it to you,
Mhm.
but they don't know what you do or don't understand.
Right.
And so you need to be willing to ask them.
Right. Yeah, and it's your life, and it can be hard sometimes because again, you're overwhelmed. So hindsight's 2020, right? I do have just two more quick questions, and I'd love to move to the next section here. One is you went to this hospital because it was your go-to, and of course there were those pressing circumstances. You had to go to the ER. Did you at any point, I know there was still information to learn about your diagnosis, but did you think, well, gosh, it's lung cancer, I need to get a second opinion? Did you ever consider that? And do you have any advice for other people on how to manage that?
Looking back, I wish I did get a second opinion. At the time, it was just you just got to do what you got to do. It's kind of like it's like when you're driving a car, right? And you see either I'm gonna smash into a tree, I'm gonna run over the kid. I'm better off hitting the tree than I am the kid, right? And so you're just trying to manage what it is you've got going on, and so it's just so much. And we didn't have the benefit of amazing shows like this, right? Where you can kind of listen and get other ideas. Because when do you get the questions? At 2 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep, right? You don't get the questions during the day when you can call somebody, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so having things like this, and that's why I talk about it, is because I want people to understand I didn't do it right. Okay. I didn't do as many wrong things as I could have done. And I was very, very fortunate,
Mhm.
but learn from the experience, right? And take that knowledge and ask the questions, understand the answers. And if you don't understand them, ask again.
Right, right. Don't be afraid to take that time for you, right? And that includes second opinions and just, it can't hurt. Unless, of course, there's some imminent time situation where you can't, those are understandable. But otherwise, and my last question, Terry, is I'm going to pull up a picture of you with your family, beautiful family. I know you had 3 adult kids. Um, can you just describe breaking the news to your family? I know it's tough, um, but it's something that I think people are usually asking questions about, like, how do I do this?
For sure. For sure. I don't think there's any way that you can easily tell your family, right? Any bad news, regardless of what it is. And, I see what I do is when I see this picture, and I'll give you also the picture that this is imitating. It's when the 3 kids were little and we did like a do-over of the same picture. My big push was I want to have pictures done with the family because I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around. And so these were the sets of pictures that we did. Telling them that I have cancer, telling them that I was sick. They saw that I was sick. They just still were convinced it was just totally pneumonia. And as the pneumonia kind of turned into something a little bit more severe, when I was put into the hospital that weekend from being filled up with fluid in my lungs, there was no turning back. They had to know, and they had to know then. And even at recurrence, it's still utterly the hardest thing. I have to tell them uh, because there's just no easy words.
Right.
There's no easy words.
I know at this point, at least your kids were older, so they could understand. Do you have guidance for other people and patients and caregivers on, I don't know, any way that you learned that might be easier to be able to tell the family, especially if you have children who can understand what cancer is?
I think you have to kind of speak to the person and how my son is going to hear it because he's an engineer and he thinks that way is completely different than my daughters who, one hears it more analytically and the other hears it, much more as a personal, emotional thing. And so you have to speak to the person and the age. And, we've had to have other difficult conversations through their lives, right? And how did they respond to it? And was it better in a group? Was it better individually? And as my kids have become older, I kind of see that it's better if I tell them all at one time, as much as I'm afraid that they're going to turn on me, right? Because it's hard. But but that's mostly because I don't want one to know before the other one does. And then the train happens on the phone.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Terry. Um, I now want to let people know that we're going to be stopping this segment. We're going to head to the next segment where Terry's going to describe the treatment and the recurrences and how the on again, off again sort of situation. So stick around.